Hi everyone, welcome to Reason with Science. I'm your host Jitendra. This episode is with Nicholas Christakis. He is the Sterling Professor of Social and Natural Science at Yale University, where he directs the Human Nature Lab. He is also the co-director of the Yale Institute for Network Science. His research focuses on social networks and the socioeconomic, biosocial, and evolutionary determinants of behavior, health, and longevity. Here we talk about nature nurture, the social suite, which includes 7 core properties of any good society, the forbidden experiment in sociology, and the importance of morality in a good society. Enjoy the conversation, share, and subscribe to support the podcast. Thank you for listening. Hi, Nicholas. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Jitendra. Thank you for having me.
So, as a sociologist, what are the major questions that you think about human societies and human nature?
Well, that's a very broad opening. I think about a lot of questions. My lab is engaged in a broad set of investigations. Our primary focus is on human social interactions, on human relationships. And we have one division in the lab that looks at the biology and evolutionary biology and genetics of human social interactions. So, for example, many animals, ourselves included, have sex with each other and reproduce, but we also befriend each other. This is very unusual in the animal kingdom. We do it, certain other primates do it, elephants do it, certain cetacean species do it. This capacity for friendship, which is to have long-term, non-reproductive unions with unrelated conspecifics. So that's uncommon. And we are interested in the evolutionary origins of this behavior. We're interested in how people pick their friends. Is there chemosignaling between individuals that helps them choose? How do you explain like at first sight? Love at first sight is interesting. But you can imagine how love at first sight might have been shaped by evolution. But what about like at first sight? We've all had that experience. Love at first sight is an uncommon experience, but like at first sight is a common experience. So we look at, in that part of the lab, we look at the biology of friendship. We look at the physiology, why you feel good in the company of your friends, why people with more friends or in different locations within a social network have different fibrinogen levels or different biomarkers. We look at the microbiome. We're interested in the spread of the microbiome, the microbes within us and how in interacting with others, these microbes, they treat our bodies as the world in which they live, and they spread from person to person. So that's the first division. The second division of the lab is we do work on where we invent network targeting algorithms, where we invent or evaluate ideas about how to identify structurally influential people within social networks. So if you could map a social network, some people, let's say, would be in the middle and some people would be on the periphery. And you might theorize that where you are in that network is relevant to your ability to have an influence on other people. So it's not who you are, but where you are in the graph that might matter. And so we can use methods for identifying such people, and we do field trials in the developing world, principally. We also do work online to see if you go into a village in Honduras or in India. For example, we've worked in Mumbai, and you identify 5 people in this village and persuade them to change their practices with respect to breastfeeding or latrine usage, can you get the whole village to copy them? And then you can find the minimum number of people chosen in a thoughtful way, such that if you give them the public health intervention, you don't have to treat everyone in the village. Then the whole village will copy them. And we've shown this can be done. We have randomized controlled trials with thousands of people in Honduras and Uganda. As I mentioned, we just published a trial in partnership with the Tata Chemicals, looking at iron fortified salt, how to get women head of households in poor Mumbai neighborhoods to adopt this practice, and in so doing, get them to influence all their friends to also adopt iron fortified salt and reduce neonatal anemia and maternal anemia. So that's the second division of the lab. The third division of the lab, we've written some software called Breadboard, which is available at breadboard.yale.edu, that allows us to, and that is integrated with Amazon Mechanical Turk, which is a source of online research subjects, and tens of thousands of people have come through our lab and done these experiments with us, and we can engineer artificial societies of real people and then experimentally control features of those societies so that we can test, for instance, if we randomly assign people into a network of one structure or another structure, does that affect their ability to cooperate or innovate or work together? Or we can create societies that have income equality or income inequality and test, if you put people in a society with unequal income distribution, how does it affect their health and wealth and well-being and so on? That's the third branch of the lab. The fourth branch does some stuff with artificial intelligence. We work on what we call social artificial intelligence, which is in hybrid systems of humans and machines. If you take a human society and replace some of the people with physical robots or human or online bots, AI agents, how does that change the nature of the society? And then the last branch of the lab does some sort of big data analytics stuff. And a lot of this work that we've been doing over the last 10 years was featured in my book, Blueprint, that I know you want to talk about in 2019. And that book, and then it's called Blueprint, The Evolutionary Origins of a Good Society. And it's a book about goodness, human goodness. It's a book about how evolution has shaped us to live in a way that has not just awful features where we kill each other and lie to each other and are brutal to each other, but also wonderful features where we love each other and are kind to each other and teach each other things. So anyway, so that's a quick summary of what the lab is doing and a quick summary of this 2019 book you and I were talking about before you started recording.
Yeah, that's definitely great, and so I think it'll be interesting for people to know that the title of your lab is Human Nature Lab. That's also interesting. So there are list of things that I like about your work, and the first one is like the name of the lab itself, that a lab focused on studying human nature. So first of all, like let's kind of
just to be clear, I mean, human nature is a vast topic. I mean, the topic we're studying is the social aspects of human nature,
Yeah, but the idea of social networks itself, so how profound that is in terms of human nature and studying human nature?
Well, we're social animals, right? But we're social in a very specific way. We're not social animals like hippopotamuses or crocodiles or fish swarms or even ants, which are also social. We're social in that we live not just in groups, but in networks. It's not like you are in a group of 100 people and everyone is connected to everyone else in that group. Each person within that group has a specific set of connections, specific number of connections, a specific set of people to whom they are connected, which gives rise to this ornate network structure within the group. And then we live our lives within that network structure. And that network has a lot to do with our fate. For example, whether you get COVID or not depends a lot on where you are in the social fabric. For example, if you have many friends and their friends have many friends and their friends of friends have many friends, you're going to be much more likely to get COVID than if you're a hermit up in the mountain with no connections. So your location within the network will affect your probability of infection. It'll affect your job prospects. If you lose your job and are looking for a new job, it will affect the kind of information you get access to. You should have the intuition that a very well-connected person, like if there's like a cool party taking place on a college campus, that person will hear about it earlier. So germs, information, opportunities, money, all these things flow through networks, and the network structure itself is highly relevant to your fate on all of these axes. And it affects your beliefs, it affects your morals, it affects your behaviors. So there are many aspects of human activity which are strongly influenced by networks, but networks are not the only determinant of all of those things. They're just an important determinant.
Yeah, this is great. So I think it's also a good point where we can kind of slowly enter into the ideas that you have mentioned in Blueprint in your book. Let's start with nature nurture debate first. Where do you stand on it? And especially when we start thinking about blueprint kind of thing, it always goes back to that point, right? Whether the way we are, is it all nature or nurture or combination of both?
Of course,
So
it's both. Yeah, I mean, of course, it's both. I mean, and everyone knows that. I mean, no sensible person believes that nature or our genes are the only relevant factor to our life experiences, nor is it wise to imagine that only nurture matters, only culture matters, that our fates have nothing to do with our genes. That's equally, not correct. And it turns out actually that there's a number of complicated ways that our nature nurture can interact. In other words, for example, whether particular genes that you have are expressed may depend on the kind of environment you are in. So, for example, let's say we did a study a few years ago. This is probably a lot of technical detail, but we did a study. There's this gene called FTO. So this paper was published in PNAS, I don't know, 6 or 8 years ago now. There's this gene called FTO, and certain risk alleles, certain variants of that gene make you more likely to be obese. But we found that whether or not that effect was present depended on when you were born. In other words, people who were born, I forgot the precise details now, but let's say in the 40s and 50s, whether they had the risk allele or not didn't affect whether they got obese, whereas people born more recently, it did affect it. And the intuition there is that the environment today is more obesogenic. It's easier to become obese now. Imagine a situation in which food is scarce. Whether you have this gene that puts you at risk for obesity or not is irrelevant. You don't get obese because nobody has any food. So the environment, you see, constrains or affects the expression of these genes. So, and actually one of the interesting things about that study is that it also means that there's a kind of observer effect in biology, just like there is an observer effect in physics, like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. It means that if you were a scientist trying to study whether this genotype was associated with this phenotype, it would depend on when the scientist was doing his or her work in history. A scientist studying the effect of FTO on obesity 50 years ago wouldn't have found any effect, would have concluded FTO does not affect body size, whereas a scientist doing the work today would conclude it. And that's a very disturbing claim, actually, and we show that was true. So nature and nurture, you see, then can interact in these very complicated ways, and there are actually other ways as well that they can interact.
Yeah, so because I also interviewed Robert Plomin, who has a book, Blueprint, again.
I know, really frustrating. We both published books with that. We have different subtitles.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, his central message is that, of course, the nurture matters or the environment matters. It's just that we can't define environment in precise terms. So it's like whatever the effects that we are studying, it is basically genetics or nature in a way. So that's why, like, I wanted to know your opinion on it. Where do you stand? And yeah, as you said, that it's the combination of both according to your views, right?
Yes.
So so here, then according to you, so the blueprint is basically these 8 points that you mentioned, which the term that you called is the social suite for a society, right?
Well, I haven't mentioned them yet, but yes, one of the arguments in the book is that there are 8 fundamental properties that all societies, all groups of people who form a society must instantiate, and that these are predicates for a good society. And the basic idea is that genes affect not just the structure and function of our bodies, and not just structure and function of our minds, and hence our behavior, but also the structure and function of our societies. And I'm interested specifically in things that we manifest interpersonally. So, for example, you might have certain allelic variants, certain variants of certain genes that make you more risk averse, or make you more religious. There's a partially or taller, or smarter, or any number of traits that genes play a role in. But those are all individual traits. But genes also shape our propensity to befriend each other. We've shown this in some work we've done. Or our capacity for love. We don't care whether you love yourself. We care whether you love other people. And ordinarily, in order for this property to be manifested, this phenotype of love to be manifested, other individuals are required. So it's about these inter-individual properties that I'm interested in, and there are 8 of them that I have in the list that I call the social suite.
Yeah, so do you think that so let's say if tomorrow we plan to create a society at Mars or something, like on other planet, do you think so? These are the 8 points which we'll discuss in a bit. Will be crucial to create that society?
Absolutely. I think governments that try to, for example, one of our innate propensities is friendship. We can't help but make friends with each other. And this is evolutionarily shaped and partially genetically based. But the capacity of individuals for friendship and loyalty to each other is a threat to many totalitarian regimes. So we have seen many times governments try to, for example, just break down family ties, because family is also a threat, or break down friendship ties. But a tremendous totalitarian force is required to stop that. And eventually the dam breaks. So for example, in East Germany, you had the Stasi that made everyone suspicious of everyone else because everyone was ratting on everyone else. The friends were reporting on each other and so on. And that was effective for a while in encouraging people to stay to themselves and limit their social connections, but not forever. You can't really build a society, in my view, in contravention to these fundamental propensities that we have. One project that I do in the book is I imagine a kind of thought experiment. So what you really would want to do in this type of situation is you would want to take a group of babies and abandon them on some isolated island and somehow provide them with food and other necessities so that they could grow up and have healthy bodies, and then come back, 20 years later and see what kind of social organization did they make for themselves. What kind of society did they make? Now, of course, you can't do this. This would be unethical and impractical. But people have thought about it for a long time. It's been called the forbidden experiment. Some very powerful rulers in ancient times, going back to Psamtik I, that Herodotus writes about, and a Scottish monarch in the 15th century and many others, have asked an analogous question, which is what kind of language is innate to us? And so they've contrived, allegedly, to do an experiment where a couple of babies were given to a mute shepherd to raise up in the mountains, and then the king would come back in 20 years or 15 years and see what language are the babies talking to each other, and then that would be the innate language, the ancestral primordial language. But we obviously can't do that experiment. So as I was thinking about this, first of all, in my lab, we invented this software that allows us to do somewhat analogous experiments with actual humans. Of course, those humans have been encultured, right? When our human subjects join this, they've grown up in societies around the world. They already have ideas about social order. So that's good, but not perfect. And another idea I had was to look at shipwrecks. So here's a group of people that were suddenly and unintentionally thrown together on some isolated island, and they had to organize themselves in some way. So how did they do that? What kind of rules for social order did they implement? So I looked at all available records regarding all available shipwrecks from 1500 to 1900. So that's, I don't know, I forgot how many, it's thousands and thousands of shipwrecks. And I found a set of 20 shipwrecks that 20 or 19, I can't remember right now, shipwrecks. I think 20 shipwrecks where there were 19 or more people that were isolated for 2 or more months. And then I got all available records about those wrecks, that, and at least one person survived to tell the tale, which is another interesting wrinkle. And to see, what and archaeological excavations of the wreck sites to see what kind of buildings did they make? Did they have class stratification? Was there one building for officers and one building for crew, or did they all live together? For example, the archaeological excavations could tell us that. Were they able to work together to do things that required more than one human? Could they build a watchtower out of stone, something a single person couldn't do, but required people to work together to do this thing? So you could infer that they were able to cooperate, for example. And so you could read the accounts, you could look at the archaeological evidence. And I read all of these things. And what I found is that actually the successful groups all made societies very similar to the kinds of societies we're all familiar with. And then I looked at online societies and virtual worlds and many, many, many examples. I looked at space exploration, actually, and some ideas about actually going back more than half a century. People have used the Antarctic at the South Pole Station as a model for space exploration. You had about 25 to 30 people in a confined space for 8 months, isolated from the rest of the world. What were their social interactions like? What was their psychology like? And could that serve as a model for, long-term space travel to Mars, for example, or Mars colony? And anyway, so I looked at all these examples, and I concluded that actually there's only one way to be social. That of all the possible kinds of ways we might imagine that we could organize ourselves, in fact, when given the opportunity, we have a very tight range of ways that we organize ourselves.
Yeah, and if we go out of that range, you give many examples that of course, everything goes haywire. There was cannibalism, yes, killing each other, etc. Yeah, that's yeah.
Well, one of my favorite examples was an almost perfect natural experiment where I think it was in 1846. I have the date. It's either 1846 or 1864. I can't remember. On the South Auckland Islands, these little islands that are between the South Island of New Zealand and Antarctica, so very far south, there were 2 wrecks at the same time that occurred on the north and the southern part of the island. And on the southern part of the island, the Grafton wrecks, and 5 men make it to shore. And they all survive for 2 years. They work together, and they eventually are able to escape the island. And on the northern part of the island, the Inverco wrecks, 19 men make it to shore, and all but 3 of them die. And there's a whole breakdown in society, and there's cannibalism, it seems like. And they were both on the islands at the same time. And there's a hint in the journals of one of the crews that I think the Grafton crew at some point thinks it's seen smoke in the distance up north, and they go hunting for that. And they don't find anyone. I was dying. I read the accounts of the Inverco crew and the Grafton crew. I was dying to find a smoking gun where in the diary, the Inverco said, "We lit a fire today." And then the Grafton diary said, "We saw the fire." But I couldn't make the connection that explicitly. But I'm not sure. There's a good chance the Grafton crew even saw the smoke of the Inverco crew up north, but they never found each other. But one group did well and one group did very poorly. And the group that did well actually instantiated many of these properties of the social suite.
Yeah, I think many books on evolution in general, they have mentioned about this evolutionary game theory. I remember reading Richard Dawkins's Extended Phenotype, where he talks about this. And there are different examples about, I think it was Hawke and or dove kind of analogy. But
Yes.
so after reading that and then reading this shipwreck, situations, it was like happening, this evolutionary game theory acting in the live situation. So that was like the really exciting part.
Well, you mentioned Dawkins' book, Extended Phenotype. We have a very similar idea, which we call the exo-phenotype, which is discussed in Blueprint in chapter 10 or 11, I can't remember right now. And the idea there is that there's no, and Dawkins makes this argument very powerfully, there's no necessary reason that the impact of our genes has to stop at the horizon of the surface of our bodies, right? We all accept that genes code for proteins, and proteins have all these effects inside our bodies, and they can shape the structure of our bodies and the structure of our minds, and therefore our behaviors. But genes can also specify things we do outside of our bodies, like artifacts that we make. So a simple example is the spider's web. Spiders genetically programmed to make a web of a particular kind with a particular shape and particular mathematical properties, and all species of that spider make the same kind of web, and the spider makes the web, and that's under evolutionary pressure. So, for example, if the mouth parts of a spider evolved in order to be able to catch more prey, we would see that as an ordinary workings of evolution. But if the spinnerets evolved on the rear end of the spider to make a different kind of a web, which is like a big mouth, right? It's like extending the reach of the mouth of the spider. That is equally under the force of evolution. So there are these things that we can make outside our bodies, and there are many examples of this. Birds' nests, for example, or one of my favorite examples is beaver dams. Beavers must make dams. They're not taught to make dams. They make dams. And they make dams of particular kinds, of a particular height and a particular shape with particular features. But what's interesting about this is that the beaver, when it makes a dam, now it modifies its environment, and it creates a feature of the environment which can reshape the evolution of the beaver. So beavers that build taller dams create bigger ponds behind the dam with a bigger shoreline. And this changes the fitness environment of the frogs and the birds and the fish and the plants in that area. It's now soggier and the water's deeper, and the fish can forage in greater areas and so on. Maybe bigger fish can thrive now in this bigger dam. So the beaver is acting as an evolutionary pressure on those other species, almost as if it was predating them, or not almost, analogous to as if it was predating them. But what's amazing is that the beaver is also acting as a selection force on itself, because now the beaver builds a bigger dam, bigger pond. So beavers in the future generations that have bigger lungs or can swim in a different way, their fitness is enhanced. And then beavers with bigger lungs then can build even bigger dams. So you can have this feedback loop in evolution whereby the animal is making its own environment, nurture via nature. My genes make me make an environment, and then that environment then modifies my evolutionary trajectory. So this is an exo-phenotype. And as soon as you begin thinking this way, then you can realize that the social networks we make, these webs that we make, are like spider webs. We reshape the social environment around us. We introduce our friends to each other. We befriend particular individuals. We invest in others. I enhance the survival of my friends. Therefore, I have a different social environment around me, very similar to the beaver making a dam of sticks. I make a web of people around me, and that then can affect the kind of person I am. So across time, I'm talking about evolutionary time. So friendly people make friendly societies, and maybe friendly societies make it easier for friendly people to thrive. So you can get this kind of feedback loop, which is encoded in our genes. This is an extension of, or modification, slight modification of Dawkins's extended phenotype argument.
And in the Darwinian evolution sense, means like the network that we select, or let's say I select around me, the kind of people, those people then further influence my children and stuff, right? Like the
Yes.
effect goes on then.
Yes, let's say you had some genetic variants which made you wiser in your ability to choose friends, or you were able to choose nicer friends who are more likely to help you, whereas I did not have that genetic variant. That would enhance your Darwinian fitness. So it's not hard to imagine how the capacity to choose friends is shaped by evolution. And indeed it is, we argue. And we've published a lot of papers to show this. We had a paper in PNAS called Friendship and Natural Selection. This is 10 years ago now, that makes some arguments about this.
Yeah, since we already discussed about friendship, let's also let me just list the 8 major points that we talked about in the social suite. So the first one is the capacity to have and recognize individual identity, love for partners and offspring. That's second. Then third one is friendship. Number fourth is social networks that we have talked a little bit about. The number fifth is cooperation. The next one is preference for one's own group. Then it's mild hierarchy, and the eighth one is social learning and teaching. So these are the 8 major points of blueprint if we want to create a good society, right? So the friendship we already talked a little bit about, and also a little bit about social networks, that how they help. So what is the importance of individual in this case when we are constructing a society?
I mean, it's one of the ironies, is that in order to have a society, you first have to be individuals, because if you want someone, if you don't want someone to feed a different child and not yourself when you were a baby, or you don't want someone to forget that they had sex with you, or you don't want someone to forget that you did them a favor and they owe you a favor, let's say, you have to be able to signal, this is me, not someone else. And the other person has to be able to recognize, oh, that's Jitender. I remember Jitender. He did me a really kind favor. He's a kind guy. And actually now he needs a favor. And, I'd like to be kind to him. I have to remember who you are from moment to moment. You need to be able to signal, I am Jitender, and I need to be able to see that signal. Now, in humans, we do that with our faces. One of the interesting things about our faces is that for your kidney to do its job, it has to work like every other kidney on the planet. It's to be like every other kidney. But for your face to do its job, it has to be different from every other face on the planet. Our faces have evolved to have the maximum variation. And there's some arguments in the book about how and why this is the case. But the point is, we use our faces to signal our uniqueness. And this is an evolutionary luxury. I mean, we could all have the same face. Why don't we all have the same face? Why don't we all look exactly the same? We don't. We all look different. And that is an evolutionary luxury, actually. It might have been much more efficient for us to all have the same kind of face, or maybe a male face and a female face, or a young person's face and an old person. You transition. You have a young face until you're 14, and then, oops, you just get the adult face. Just like puberty. Maybe at puberty, in addition to growing facial hair, in puberty, in addition to growing facial hair, everything else, maybe you just change to the adult face. None of that is what happens, of course. We all have our own unique faces, and we devote a lot of brain power to be able to detect the face of other people, to see, to distinguish one face from another. And even based on the visual appreciation of faces alone, discern relationships between other people. So you can look into people and say they're brothers, because you can see in their faces that they're similar to each other, right? Or they're parent and child. All of us know this. Oh my God, you look just like your mother. We can see that. Okay. So this capacity also to detect these individuality is also an evolutionary luxury. It takes a lot of brain power to do this. The brain is an expensive organ. And all of this is important because it provides a capacity for individuality, provides the bricks with which to build societies. To identify, keep track of your friends, to keep track of who you love. You have to be able to tell, this is a person I'm in love with, not some other person. To be able to remember who to cooperate with, and so on. So paradoxically, the capacity for individual identity is crucial for the capacity for society.
And why the group selection is important, or the preference for your own group? Because I mean, of course,
group selection has a different meaning. I'm not sure that's what you mean in this setting.
No, I said group preference.
In-group bias, preference for your own group. In-group bias,
So, because I mean, when we think of the faces, of course, we can look at the face and, I can signal that it's me, and it's Nicholas, etc. But then in the same way, we can have that bias as well, right? Like, okay, this is from my group and the other one is from other group. We have different examples. Yuval Harari talks about these things in terms of imagined reality. When it comes to nationality and all that, but you think that, or according to your work, it is important for the society, and why is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the more depressing parts of the social suite. Why we have a preference for our own groups compared to other groups. Now, it's very important to realize there's a difference between preferring your own group and being indifferent to other groups versus preferring your own group and thinking the other group should be put to death. We need to put them in ovens or slaughter them, right? And of course, throughout human history, there's been this vile tendency. No human group is immune to this kind of hatred, unfortunately. I'm immune to having this kind of hatred, let alone being the recipient of that kind of hatred. So there's no escape, I think, unfortunately, from this in-group preference. But there should be some escape, I think, from out-group hatred, which is different than out-group indifference. Now, why would we evolve this? Now, there's a lot of ideas about this, but one idea that I can illustrate that I think likely plays a role is that we evolved in-group preference in parallel with our evolution of our ability to cooperate with each other. And cooperation is beneficial. Like, we can work together to kill a mastodon, and get a lot of meat. Or we can work together to repel lions that are attacking our camp. If it's every man for himself, is not a good strategy when you're under attack. So here's the way to think about that, I think. Imagine that you had 1,000 people, a population of 1,000 people, and you told people in this population that you need to cooperate with each other. You all need to work together. Each person should be nice to the other people and cooperate with them. Well, this would be a very difficult challenge because, first of all, if you were nice to one person, you might never encounter them again. There are 1,000 people, you might never encounter them again. Or if you did, they or you might forget who you were. You'd say, Bob, I was nice to you before. And Bob would say, I have no idea who you are. I don't remember you. I've encountered 1,000 people. And I'm not going to reciprocate. I'm not going to pay you back what you say that I owe you a favor, So what has been found is in a kind of situation like that with large groups of people and no structure, unstructured large groups, is that cooperation decays and can't be sustained. Now imagine instead, you go to this group of 1,000 people and you form 10 groups of 100 and you give them little flags, a purple flag and a green flag and a brown flag or whatever. And you say, everyone hold up your flag. And then you tell the people, you know what? Just be nice to the people that are holding your color flag. You should have the intuition that that's a much easier challenge for everybody. And what you would find in that type of a society or that type of a situation is that cooperation would arise and be sustained. So in a situation in which you have no structure, everyone's interacting with everybody else, there's no group dynamics, cooperation disappears. But in a situation in which you allow for and maybe even foster some structure, so there are 10 groups of 100 that can be indexed, now cooperation, it can be sustained. And so there's a lot of evolutionary models about these types of processes, which help us understand why we have the cognitive capacity to make differences between groups and why we might have evolved the preference to be nice to members of our own group and indifferent to, at least at a minimum, indifferent to the fates of outgroups, because that capacity makes cooperation possible in the first place. And cooperation is useful, helpful to us from a fitness point of view. So that's the idea, one idea about why in-group bias exists. Now, I need to say that the arbitrariness, what we have is we have the capacity to make arbitrary distinctions, right? In other words, if you prefer members of your own religion to members of other religions, there's no genetics of religion. In other words, there's probably a genetics of religiosity, but that's a different topic. Whether you are a Catholic or a Jew or a Hindu or a Muslim isn't in your genes. That your genes aren't dictating what your religious beliefs are. But if you prefer one religious group to another, you're instantiating this capacity to make distinctions between groups. But because it's arbitrary, you can now imagine that we can redefine the groups. So, instead of saying there are Black Americans and white Americans, you can just say we're all Americans and we're not Russians. You can have a kind of different distinction. And that's in a way you can almost hack the mind. You can almost take advantage of the arbitrariness of our desire to make these distinctions and redraw the boundaries of what counts as us and them. And I think that does offer actually some public policy, some prospects for beneficial public policy.
Yeah, the question is how... Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'll just say one more thing. So right now, tribalism, which is another way of talking about in-group bias, is very ascendant in American society. And I think in India too, by the way, and in Europe, around the world, there's a lot of tribalism. And there are basically two ways you can cope with the problem. So one way is you can go, like I've been just discussing, up a level. So like, let's say in America today, we have a lot of divisions along artificial population. If you're rural or urban, or you're Black or white, or you're rich or poor, or whatever, we have all these divisions. You're conservative or you're liberal politically or whatever. But we could take advantage of this and go up a level and say, well, we're all Americans, right? Like, you're all part of my group. We don't have to have these divisions. So one solution to tribalism is to go up a level. And in fact, I think that one of the reasons tribalism is so ascendant in the United States today was, in fact, the fall of the Soviet Union. I think when we were united against a common enemy, these divisions may not have been as salient. Now, I'm not saying that America had some kind of hallowed, bigotry-free history. That's not true. I'm just saying the fact that these divisions in our society are more salient today than you would think may have to do with the lack of a common enemy. And this is a little bit of a science fiction trope, where aliens invade the earth and suddenly all the divisions among people become irrelevant, right? We all band together to fight the aliens. It didn't matter anymore if you were Indian or Chinese, we're going to fight the aliens. That was the important thing. So one solution to tribalism is to go up a level. Another solution, and by the way, this is what de Tocqueville, in his analysis of American society 200 years ago, observed. He goes, it's amazing. These Americans believe that anyone can be an American. And we're a nation of immigrants. You come to the United States, you buy into the Bill of Rights, some basic political principles about liberal society, and you're an American. You can't become a Japanese or a Swiss in the same way that you can become an American. Anyone can be an American. And it's about your beliefs, and it's a remarkable and wonderful property in our society. And this has been understood for hundreds of years. And de Tocqueville writes about this, that one of the ways that Americans deal with this nation of immigrants is that they go up a level and they see that we're all Americans, okay? But also in our history, there's another solution which takes advantage of a different part of the social suite, which is to go down a level to the level of individuals and to say what matters is not what group you're a part of, but who you are. And this is Martin Luther King's argument. Martin Luther King argues he hopes that his children will live in a time when people are judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Martin Luther King is saying what matters is your individual identity, not your group membership. So this also is a solution to this middle level tribalism. We can go up or we can go down. Both of those help in confronting the pernicious effects of tribalism.
Yeah, so the question is that how much of it can change, since you mentioned that people may have some sort of genetic tendency to band in a group, but then how much that can be changed using, of course, nurture only, because so far we don't have, or I don't know, in the future, if we may have tools to change it, but like at the genetic
level.
Well, I
mean, you think about political leaders have often exploited this for ill, like blaming minorities, right? This is a classic tactic of evil political leaders. They say there are problems in our society, and this group is to blame. Homosexuals are to blame. Jews are to blame. Immigrants are to blame. Always some small group that we can beat up on, they're to blame, right? So the fact that it is possible to highlight difference in a way that is politically expedient and helps to empower these politicians suggests that the opposite should also be possible. That it should be possible to say what really matters is that, doesn't matter whether we're black or white, we're all South African, right? This is in essence what Mandela tried to do to heal the divisions after apartheid, right? Mandela comes to power and he says, we're not going to get retribution, right? That's not the kind of society we're going to be. We're all South Africans, is his argument. And of course, he was a great leader, right? And so I think so I'm not as pessimistic as you. Like, I think it is definitely easier to exploit division than it is to foster unity. I agree that it is easier, but I don't think it's necessarily our fate.
Yeah, so in the words of Robert Sapolsky, he talks about humans have categorical thinking. So we always want to have this black and white categories, right? Grays are the problems for us.
Yes, that's how our brains evolved to take a spectrum of gray and divide it to black and white. That's right.
Exactly.
Hegel makes a similar argument. That's right.
Yeah, and your solution is that we just zoom out a bit and kind of so what you're saying is at the end we do need a kind of group just to, I don't know, feel that belonging or something. Yes. But we can kind of just maximize or zoom out and kind of
redefine it. I mean, one of the things that societies work better when they have overlapping group identities. In other words, so people might be black or white, they might be rich or poor, they might be they might like soccer or football. They might be Catholic or Muslim. They can have all these overlapping identities. And the more overlapping identities you have, the easier it is to bind the society together. It's when it's when all those identities are co-located that you get problems. In other words, if every person of a certain kind has every one of these same traits, so you're a rural, Catholic, white, conservative, and everyone else is a urban, Jewish, black, liberal. If they all align, then you can have this great, fight. But if they're overlapping, then you don't, right? Because you say, okay, well, I'm not like you on this axis, but I'm really like you on all these other axes. So why should I hate you? So I think that is another, you get stronger societies. And this is what liberal democracies are supposed to be like, right? So, it's only in societies where, like where you have perfect ethnic, religious, linguistic overlap that you get, voting blocks. We all vote the same because we're all the same. But if you have overlapping identities, then you get a more functional democracy and a more functional society. Am I making myself clear? Is that sort of obvious?
Yeah. It makes sense. It's just that I've been wondering about these, like how many options or what are the options that we have. So for example, I don't know if humans in the future go to Mars,
Yes. Which I hope we do.
Can we kind of then still band together, or it'll be then, like Earth humans and Mars humans, and then we kind of competing with each other and that.
No, eventually, yes, that will happen. No, I have no doubt that the colonists on Mars eventually will rise up and stop, and hate us, hate the Earth. But thankfully, that's thousands of years from now. Well, I think we'll have a colony on Mars within a century, and we may have I think estimates are that it would take 1,000 years with current technology, or less than 1,000, to terraform Mars. I mean, there's no doubt that humans are going to colonize Mars. I wish I could live to see it, but I'm not going to. I don't think I'm even going to live to see a human on Mars, unfortunately. When I was a 10-year-old boy, I thought for sure I would live long enough to see a spaceman on Mars. But I don't think I'm going to live to see that, which is sad for me. But my children will, hopefully.
But why do you think it's important to colonize Mars?
Well, I think it's inevitable. I don't necessarily think it's important in the sense of I don't think our planet is doomed, and so our fate requires us to colonize Mars. No, I think we can take better care of our current planet. So that's not the reason. I think it's inevitable. And I also think it's admirable. I think it's in the human spirit. It's exploration, it's expansion, it's hard. I think, and I would rather see us, for the amount of money America spent on the war in Iraq, which is almost between $500 billion and $1 trillion was spent on the war in Iraq, we could have had a Mars colony. Well, I would much rather we spend the money on a Mars colony than on warfare. And I think the rest of the world would admire us and even might fear us. Let's say we want to be feared, not admired. The technical know-how that's required to achieve such a thing, and it would give a kind of hopeful and ambitious prospect to some of the brightest minds in our society. These are all good things, I think. So better use of money. I mean, it's hard to imagine a worse use of money and talent than to manufacture bombs that you then detonate. I mean, all this effort, we got all these rare materials that have to be mined, and all these people have to think about how to manufacture the bomb, and the bomb costs $10 million, and then you explode it. I mean, what a colossal waste of money and talent. And I would rather have us use it otherwise. So, I mean, these are the senses in which I think we should and will colonize Mars. Yes, and I suspect there's already some microbes up there, and whether and our colonization, of course, will completely interact with, probably decimate those microbes, or they will kill us. Although I think that's less likely.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I mean, if there are microbes on Mars.
If I had to bet, I would make that bet. If I lived long enough, I would bet for sure there are.
Oh, that's great. So yeah. Then we should hope that Elon Musk won't bomb the Mars with something, because we need another sample of life, whether it's the same or it's different.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I'm pretty sure I think either ancient Mars, life from ancient Mars came to Earth, to ancient Earth, or at some point in our history, life from ancient Earth went to Mars, and we have now evidence of space rocks that can travel. We have evidence of life forms that can live in space for a long time. I don't find this implausible, any of this implausible. I think it's less likely that panspermia took place, that life to both Earth and Mars came from somewhere else. That's less likely to me. But I think it's quite possible that if there is life on Mars, I suspect it'll have the same DNA code that we do. But if not, that would be even more astonishing. So we'll see. I won't live long enough to see that, unfortunately. But anyway.
But you never know the way science is progressing. But yeah, since we are talking about colonizing Mars and also, of course, wars and stuff, you do add hierarchies in this social suite.
Mild hierarchy.
But mild hierarchies. So why mild?
Well, we did not evolve to have fully egalitarian societies. And there are a number of reasons for that. But we also don't tolerate or like overly hierarchical societies. There are other animal species where there's tremendous hierarchy. For example, in a cohort of animals, only one male might be able to reproduce, for example, and none of the others, which is very hierarchical. Or resources, like if an animal is killed, the top dog gets all the best parts, and the other dogs get little or nothing. So we're neither extreme. We're neither fully egalitarian, nor are we extremely hierarchical. We have what I call mild hierarchy. And there are a number of reasons for that. But one of the reasons is that mild hierarchy tends to suppress interpersonal violence and tends to optimize the spread of useful information. And in the book, I give some examples of this and how it came to be. What are the theoretical reasons and empirical evidence that mild hierarchy is beneficial?
Yeah, so I've been having conversations with my colleagues and friends, and some of them, they believe that hierarchies are pointless because you have, especially when mentorship is replaced by narcissism, where you completely ruin because I think it's the other point that you also have in social. So it is the social learning and teaching, right? Like that's another important aspect. So, and hierarchies tend to they may of course improve the learning and teaching, but then if the person is narcissistic in a way, you may be you may just ruin that property.
I mean, of course, there can be toxic people, and there are exceptions to any rule. But one of the ways our species has hierarchy is with knowledge. So if you think about despotic hierarchies in other animal species, those hierarchies are maintained by the costs that superordinates can impose on subordinates. So, you're the biggest gorilla, so you can beat up all the other gorillas, and the other gorillas fear you, and they stay away from you. And as a result, you have a bigger harem, okay? Or you get better fruit to eat off the tree. But in our species and in certain other species, there's an alternative means to have status, which is not by the physical costs you can impose on others, but by the mental benefits you can bestow upon others. In other words, I can get status not because I'm bigger than you, but I can get status because I can get status not because I'm bigger than you and can beat you up and punish you. I can get status because I'm more knowledgeable than you and give you some knowledge that you want. And what you find in those kinds of hierarchies is that subordinates want to be near superordinates. So in despotic hierarchies, you stay away from the top guy. But in these types of status-based hierarchies, you approach the top guy because you can learn something, how to find food or how to find shelter, for instance. So we have this alternative pathway for hierarchy that's available in our species that's not available in most other species. And this leads to but we have both hierarchies, actually. And this leads to some complex evolutionary dynamics. And this hierarchy, therefore, is connected to teaching. So in other words, I am absolutely simply the moral equal of my students. I have no special standing in our species because I'm a teacher and they are students. Doesn't make me more morally valuable or anything else. But it's absolutely false to believe that my students know as much as I do. That's not correct. That's why I'm a teacher. I've spent my whole life learning stuff. And that's why my students want to be my students, because I can teach them stuff. And then they can leave and go on and do whatever they want with that. Maybe they'll become teachers, or maybe they'll do something else. I don't know. So, and it's the same with anything in our, it's not just any kind of knowledge. It's not just academic knowledge. You want to, if you're a band of ancestral humans and there's one of you that knows how to make a bow and arrow, and another one of you that knows how to track an animal, and another one of you that knows how to kill an animal, those are all very valuable skills that take a long time to master. And those people are rightly revered and are rightly seen as gurus and as someone you can learn from. And you want to be near them. You don't avoid them, right? And so that's part of the way in which mild hierarchy is important.
And it's absolutely a gift for humans, right? Like the fact that we can either learn or we can teach to the next
Yes.
generation, it's amazing.
Yes, that's what has allowed the social conquest of the earth, in fact. That our capacity for culture. The fact that when I was born, every invention by every ancient person was available to me. The animals had been domesticated, and the means by which animals could be taken care of had been invented by others thousands of years ago. Roads had been built, and the procedures for building roads had been invented. For navigating, the stars, many stars had been mapped. Compasses had been invented. They were just given to me when I was born. Calculus had been invented. When we learned calculus in high school, if you took us back 500 years, we'd have been the smartest mathematician on the planet. We didn't have to do a thing to learn calculus. Newton invented it, and here it is. You can have it. So it's like when you're born, you inherit all this patrimony of knowledge that had been invented by all these prior human beings. And it makes you able to have a more productive and fuller life. And knowledge doesn't just spread across time intergenerationally, but it spreads across space. So when something is invented, like a fishhook is invented, it's, as I talk about in the book, it spreads, right? Soon, oh my God, that's a really valuable invention, a fishhook. And so it rapidly spreads or writing, symbols of means of writing and so on, or fire, the invention of fire. When you see that other people can, cook their food, you're like, wow, that's pretty smart. I'd like to do that too, So this capacity for culture, which is which is part of the social suite, and which is also in our evolutionary heritage, and this capacity for teaching and learning is hugely efficient and very valuable to us, as part of our common heritage as human beings.
Yeah. So the last point of social suite is, which I kept it for the last, of course, is the love. The feeling and pair bonding.
Well, love was second on the list of 8, but we're discussing last.
Exactly. Because I think that's again another central theme. I mean, of course, all of them, they are important, but this is something which I think it's been a little bit controversial in a way that when I spoke with, for example, Franz de Waal or even Desmond Morris, both of them, they, of course, give examples of other apes where we don't see this kind of pair bonding that we see in humans.
That's correct.
But then it does exist, and in your take is a little bit different from that point of view. But okay, so let's hear it. What do you think about pair bonding and love?
Well, I mean, I talk about this at length in Blueprint, but we have this. We don't just have sex with each other. We form a sentimental attachment to the people we are having sex with, that we're mating with. We love them, and probably love originally evolved to foster mother-children bonds. So the capacity for love originally probably was the love that a mother initially felt for her children. And eventually you have male-female love in heterosexual couples. Of course, we can have homosexual couples too, but right now we're talking about the reproductive couples. So there is a way in which this capacity for love we have is a phenotype, is an evolved phenotype. Now, pair bonding is distinct from love and is seen in other mammals, is seen in most birds, pair bond. So it's not unique to the mammalian order. I mean, it can be seen in other orders. But it is a widespread aspect of human society, and it's seen in every society. I even look in arranged marriages, so many societies that have arranged marriage. I look at polygamous societies too, where you have polygyny or polyandry. I look at societies with arranged marriages. They all have love. One of the things that's interesting about arranged marriages is that love is seen as an imprudent predicate on which to base mate selection. So the adults in the community think, we don't want our child picking who they're going to spend their lives with based on who they fall in love with. That's dangerous and irrational, and they might fall in love with the wrong person. But even in societies with arranged marriages, they want love to occur after marriage. So it is a hope for outcome after the marriage. Like, in other words, it's not like societies with arranged marriages are devoid of love. Not at all. They are quite interested in love occurring. And even in those societies, there's a recognition that some young couples will inevitably fall in love and violate their parents, like the Romeo and Juliet story, violate their parents' wishes and run away to be in love. So, we have literature about this, we have religions about this, we have poems about this. We talk about it all the time. Our songs are about this. I mean, you can't escape the role of love in human societies. And then of course we have fraternal love, like the band of brothers, soldiers who will sacrifice their lives for their colleagues, and who would describe their feelings as love, of how they love their fellow soldiers. So it's not just about sex, to be clear, although I think it clearly evolved in a setting of sex.
Yeah. So at the end, like, how do we then define a good society? Is this the blueprint? Let's say if we take these 8 major points that you mentioned in Social Suite.
Well, I won't say, what can I say about that? I would say it's a blueprint or a recipe. It's a blueprint for a good society. I won't exclude the possibility that there are other features that should be there, or that you couldn't have a good society if you didn't have all 8 features. But I can tell you that based on the review of evidence that I put in the book and all the work that we've done over the years, this is the blueprint for a good society, those qualities.
Yeah, one thing that I was wondering that I won't say didn't include, but you didn't mention it here is the morality part. Is it like obviously, or is it like obvious thing which will happen, or?
Well, there are moral elements to the things so cooperation, for example, right? And love. I mean, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but we don't care whether you love yourself or are kind to yourself or are just to yourself. We care whether you love others or are kind to others or are just to others. And so the social nature of these virtues is, in fact, the social nature of many virtues, most of our virtues even, I might say, are social. There are virtues you can have that are not social. For example, you can be brave in the face of nature. You can climb a mountain and show bravery. So there are virtues which are asocial, but most virtues are social, I would say, and involve the presence of others and the actions that you manifest towards others. So in constructing the social suite, I think I do provide, and I discuss this in chapter 12 of the book, a kind of foundation for a perspective on morality. But I don't have any kind of moral sentiments as a distinct feature. I don't think they're necessary. I think they flow from these other axioms. And furthermore, I don't include religion in the social suite because you can be religious on your own. In other words, you can believe in God on your own. You can pray on your own. Those are all things you can do without any other human beings. But you can't love on your own, and you can't cooperate on your own. You can't cooperate with yourself, and you can't befriend yourself. You need to befriend someone else. All of those other elements of the social suite require other people, right? Even identity. You don't look in a mirror. You don't need to see your own face to know it's you. You need other people's faces in order to have identity.
Yeah, but then there have been these arguments where, of course, people say morality comes from religion, and religion is essential for a good society. And so, how do you respond to that?
No, I don't think religion is essential for a good society. I think religion is a feature of most societies, and I think religion can help bind groups together. But I don't think religion is required to bind groups together. And I certainly don't think that. I think there's a deep connection between morality and religion, but I absolutely think you can have morality without religion.
Few days back, actually, I was having a conversation and I was comparing going to church and, I don't know, watching FIFA, So I was like, maybe these are the two parallels. You just want to band with one group there or the other group there, So yeah, at the end, I think this one nice quote that you give in the book, which is, the arc of our evolutionary history is long, but it bends towards goodness. And it's a great message. I think that, and then you mentioned, I think, quite a few times that the we as scientists, or the people, they have been focusing on the differences between people, but I think there is a lot to learn, in a way that we have a lot in common as well.
Yes.
So,
the social suite is something every human has. Every society has these qualities, and it's part of our evolutionary heritage. And I think there's much more that we have in common with each other and that unites us than that divides us. So I very much believe in our common humanity. And I think that that's an optimistic and scientifically well-grounded perspective on human beings.
It definitely is. And other thing which I really liked about your work is that once you start reading it, it becomes obvious, that it is like this. So that was the exciting part. So thank you for coming on to the podcast, sharing your work, and thank you for the great message.
Thank you, Jitender.
Yeah.